All right, let's dive right in. We're going to untangle one of the most critical and honestly, one of the most dangerous tripwires in retirement planning for business owners. It's called the 5% owner trap for required minimum distributions, or RMDs. Let's get into it. So, let's say you're a business owner. You love what you do, and you're planning to work well past the age when most people start taking money out of their retirement plans. You're probably thinking, great, I can just delay my 401k RMDs, right? Well, not so fast. The Internal Revenue Code has a very specific, and I mean very unforgiving trap just waiting for you if you're not careful. Okay, to really get our heads around this thing, we need to build it from the ground up. We'll start with the basic deferral rule, the good part. Then we'll expose the trap itself. From there, we'll get into the weeds, defining exactly who a 5% owner is, pinpointing the single most critical year for this test. And finally, we'll talk about how to steer clear of the whole mess. Let's start with the foundation, the RMD deferral rule. Now, for most employees, this is an absolutely fantastic tool. It lets them keep the retirement funds growing, tax-deferred, even after they've officially hit retirement age. So, the general rule is pretty straightforward. You have to start taking RMDs by April 1st of the year after you reach your applicable age, which, depending on your birth year, is 73 or 75. But for qualified plans like your 401k, there's this great little thing called the still working exception. It lets you push off those RMDs until April 1st of the year after you actually retire. Now, this is crucial. This exception does not apply to IRAs at all. And hey, this isn't just some friendly guideline from the IRS. It is baked right into the law. You're looking at Internal Revenue Code Section 401A9CI. See that simple phrase, the later of? That's everything. Those two little words create the entire still working exception, which is a huge benefit for most employees. But you know how it is with the tax code. What one section gives, another can and often does take away. And this is where we find the carve-out, the exception to the exception. This is what creates that nasty trap specifically for business owners. You see, the still working exception seems like it should apply to everyone, right? But Congress was a little worried that business owners could just keep themselves on the payroll forever to avoid taking RMDs. So they wrote in a special provision to stop that from happening. And boom, here it is, straight from the code. Section 401A 9C2I says that beautiful deferral rule shall not apply to a 5% owner. The bottom line? If you fall into this category, the still working exception is just gone. Poof. You have to start your RMDs when you hit your applicable age, whether you're working or not. Period. So, that leads to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Who exactly is a 5% owner? Well, the definition is super technical, and it actually cross-references another section of the code. So let's break this down very, very carefully. The definition actually comes from IRC Section 416, which deals with top-heavy plants. It defines a 5% owner as someone who owns, and this is key, more than 5% of the company. That ownership can be measured a few ways: outstanding stock, total voting power, or if it's not a corporation, your capital or profits interest. I really want you to focus on the precision of that language, more than 5%. This is so critical. If you own exactly 5.0%, you are not caught by this rule. You can still use the still working exception. That tiny little greater than symbol has absolutely massive financial implications. And just when you thought that was simple enough, it gets way more complex. You don't just count your own shares. Under what are called the constructive ownership rules of IRC 318, you are legally considered to own the stock held by your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, and your parents. So get this, if you own 2% and your son owns 4%, the law says you are a 6% owner. You're caught in the trap. Now, notice who isn't on that list: siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles. Okay, but understanding who is a 5% owner is really only half the battle. The other, equally critical piece of this puzzle is when that status is determined. This is where so many people get tripped up. And here's what you have to grasp: it is a one-time permanent test. Your status is determined during a single specific determination year. That's the plan year that ends in the calendar year you reach your applicable RMD age. If you are a 5% owner at any point during that one critical year, you are flagged as one forever for RMD purposes. Selling your shares a year later, it doesn't matter. The status is locked in. let's just walk through this again because it is that important. The test happens during the determination year. A conservative reading of the rules suggests that being a 5% owner for even a single day during that year springs the trap. And once that year is over, your RMD status is set in stone. Trying to sell your shares on January 2nd of the next year is just too late.
Okay, we've laid out the foundation, the trap, the definition, and the timing. Now let's get to the most practical part of all. How in the world do you navigate this, and what are the consequences if you get it wrong?
The main strategy to avoid this trap is divestment. And to make it work, you have to reduce your direct and attributed ownership down to 5.0% or less before your determination year even begins. So for a calendar year plan, that transaction has to be done and dusted by December 31st of the year before. And remember those tricky attribution rules. Gifting shares to your child won't help you one bit. You'll have to transfer them to someone like a sibling or a totally unrelated party. And you really don't want to get this wrong because the consequences are severe. Personally, you're looking at a 25% excise tax on the amount you failed to withdraw. Now, that can sometimes be waived if you have a really good reason, but for the business, it's even more serious. It's an operational failure that could, in the worst-case scenario, lead to the disqualification of the entire retirement plan. Thankfully, there are IRS correction programs like EPCRS to fix these mistakes, but it's not a path you want to go down. So the 5% owner rule is clearly not something you can just ignore. It demands really proactive planning and a deep technical understanding of the code. So as your applicable age gets closer, the critical question isn't just, are you still working? It's, is your ownership structure ready for this one-time permanent test?